My name is Amanda, and at 32 years old, I never expected to be fighting for space in the home I bought with my own money. When I let my parents move in temporarily 3 years ago, I had no idea they would slowly take over every inch of my house. The criticism of my life choices became daily background noise. But when they demanded I give up my master bedroom for my sister and her newborn and relocate to the unfinished basement, they had no clue I had already sold the house. Before I tell you how I finally stood up for myself after years of being taken advantage of, let me know where you are watching from and hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever had to set boundaries with family. I always prided myself on working hard. Throughout college, I juggled 2 part-time jobs while maintaining a 3.8 GPA in my marketing program. After graduation, I landed an entry-level position at a digital marketing agency in the city. For 3 years, I lived in a tiny studio apartment, saving every penny I could. I brown-bagged my lunch, limited myself to 1 coffee shop visit per week, and turned down expensive nights out with colleagues. My friends teased me about being frugal, but I had a dream, owning my own home before 30. The day I turned 28, I closed on my house. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was mine. A charming 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home with a modest backyard in a quiet suburb. The master bedroom had an ensuite bathroom and a small sitting area that I turned into a reading nook. 1 bedroom became my home office, and the 3rd I set up as a guest room. I painted the walls, planted flowers in the garden, and slowly filled each room with furniture I carefully selected. For the first time in my life, I had a space that was completely my own, decorated exactly how I wanted it. My parents, Frank and Diane, had always been somewhat financially unstable. Dad worked in construction, but struggled to hold steady employment. Mom worked part-time at a department store, but had ongoing health issues that limited her hours. They managed to get by, living in a series of rental apartments throughout my childhood. When I was growing up, money was always tight, but we made it work. 6 months after I moved into my new home, I received a distressed call from my mother. Dad had been laid off again, and they had fallen behind on rent. Their landlord was threatening eviction. Mom was crying, saying they might have to sleep in their car. My heart sank as I listened to her sobbing over the phone. "Amanda, we just need a little time to get back on our feet," Mom pleaded. "Just a few weeks until your father finds another job." I hesitated, but ultimately offered them my guest bedroom. They were my parents after all, and I couldn't bear the thought of them being homeless. I set clear expectations. This was temporary, just until they found stable employment and could afford their own place again. The first few weeks were actually pleasant. Mom cooked dinner most nights, and Dad helped with small repairs around the house. We ate together at my dining table, sharing stories and laughing. Dad fixed the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom and replaced some loose boards on the back deck. Mom kept the kitchen spotless and planted some vegetables in a corner of the yard. It felt like a harmonious living arrangement. But as weeks turned into months, I noticed concerning changes. When I mentioned apartment listings I had seen, they would find reasons why none of them were suitable. Dad claimed he was waiting for the right job opportunity rather than taking what was available. Their possessions, initially confined to the guest bedroom, began spreading throughout the house. Mom's craft supplies took over the dining room table. Dad's fishing gear cluttered the garage to the point where I could barely park my car. Around the 6-month mark, the first critical comments began. It started subtly, with Mom questioning my work hours. "You work too much, Amanda. No wonder you are still single at your age." Dad would chime in about my spending habits, despite the fact that I was financially supporting all 3 of us. $30 for a haircut? In my day, we cut our own hair and saved that money. They began rearranging furniture without asking me first. When I came home one day to find my living room completely reorganized, Mom waved off my concerns. "This layout makes much more sense. Honey, trust me, I have been keeping a home since before you were born." The comments about my social life stung the most. Whenever I had plans with friends, Mom would make passive-aggressive remarks. "Going out again? I suppose that laundry will just wash itself." If I brought a date home, they would interrogate him and then critique everything about him after he left. Too tall, too short. Wrong job, wrong laugh. Nothing and no one was ever good enough. I began to feel like a guest in my own home, tiptoeing around my parents' opinions and preferences. The house I had worked so hard for no longer felt like my sanctuary. Instead, it became a source of anxiety. I found myself spending more time at the office or at friends' places, just to avoid the tension at home. Yet, every time I considered addressing the situation, guilt would overwhelm me. These were my parents. They had raised me, supported me through school, and celebrated my accomplishments. How could I complain about helping them when they needed me? So I swallowed my frustration and tried to make the best of it, hoping that eventually they would find their footing and move out as originally planned. But that day never seemed to come. Instead, my parents became more entrenched in my home, acting less like guests and more like they owned the place. And I, their adult daughter who owned the house, felt increasingly powerless to reclaim my space and my peace of mind. By the 1-year mark, it became clear that my parents had no intention of finding their own place. Dad had picked up sporadic construction jobs, but always had excuses about why he couldn't find steady work. Mom had reduced her hours at the department store, citing worsening back pain. Any mention of apartments or moving plans was met with dramatic sighs or sudden changes in conversation. To avoid confrontation, I started working longer hours. I volunteered for every business trip, weekend project, and late-night meeting. My boss was thrilled with my dedication, but my friends worried about burnout. The truth was, I preferred the stress of work to the tension waiting for me at home. The criticisms escalated from occasional comments to daily occurrences. Nothing I did seemed right in their eyes. If I cooked dinner, Mom would hover over my shoulder, pointing out everything I was doing wrong. That is not how you chop an onion, Amanda. No wonder your meals have no flavor. If I ordered takeout after a long day, Dad would calculate the cost and lecture me about wasting money. Do you know how many home-cooked meals we could make for the price of that Chinese food? My cleaning was never thorough enough. My lawn care was inadequate. My clothing choices were either too conservative or too revealing. My dating life was simultaneously too active and not active enough. I was both working too much and not advancing quickly enough in my career. One Saturday, I came home from a morning run to find Mom had completely reorganized my kitchen. She had thrown away my collection of takeout menus, relegated my favorite mugs to the back of a cabinet, and replaced them with her own dishes at the front. Mom, why did you throw out my things without asking? I questioned, trying to keep my voice level. Those cabinets were a disaster, Amanda. I did you a favor organizing them properly. And those menus were just cluttering up the drawer. When I tried to explain that I liked having those menus, she dismissed my feelings entirely. You are being dramatic. This is much better now. Dad's takeovers were equally frustrating. Without consulting me, he canceled my cable package and switched to a different provider because he preferred their sports channels. He rearranged the garage to accommodate his growing collection of tools, leaving barely enough space for my car. He even changed the thermostat settings, complaining that my preferred temperature was wasting electricity. The financial burden grew heavier too. I was paying the mortgage, utilities, groceries, and home repairs. My parents occasionally bought small items or prepared meals, but these contributions were minimal compared to the costs of supporting 3 adults. When I gently suggested they might help with utilities, Mom looked wounded. We're on a fixed income, Amanda. We thought you wanted to help us. The invasion extended beyond the physical space of my home. My parents began inviting relatives over without asking me first. I would come home from work to find my aunt and uncle sitting in my living room or my cousins swimming in the community pool using my resident pass. My parents acted as hosts, showing off their home to family members. During one such impromptu family gathering, I overheard my mother telling my Aunt Sylvia, "We are so blessed that Amanda has this big house for all of us. She would be rattling around in here all alone otherwise." My attempts to establish even the most basic boundaries were unsuccessful. When I asked them to check with me before inviting people over, Mom tearfully accused me of being ashamed of my family. When I requested that they not enter my bedroom when I wasn't home, Dad called me paranoid and secretive. What are you hiding in there? We are family. There should not be secrets. The constant criticism and boundary violations took a toll on my mental health. I developed insomnia, lying awake at night listening to my father's snoring through the walls. I became anxious about coming home, sitting in my car in the driveway, gathering courage before walking through my own front door. My friends noticed the change in me. You seem so stressed all the time, my best friend Rachel observed during one of our coffee dates. I have not seen you laugh in months. I finally made an appointment with a therapist, Dr. Marshall, who specialized in family dynamics. In her calm office, away from the tension of my home, I broke down and shared everything. It sounds like you are experiencing a significant boundary violation, Dr. Marshall noted. Your parents have effectively taken over your home without respecting your ownership or autonomy. But they are my parents, I protested weakly. I cannot just kick them out. Being family doesn't give someone the right to disregard your boundaries, she explained gently. In fact, healthy family relationships require boundaries to thrive. Over several sessions, Dr. Marshall helped me understand that my reluctance to confront my parents stemmed from patterns established in childhood. As the responsible, achievement-oriented child, I had always been expected to accommodate others' needs before my own. She encouraged me to practice setting small boundaries first, then work up to the larger conversation about living arrangements. I tried implementing her advice, starting with small requests. I asked my parents to check with me before using my car. I established that my home office was private and not to be used when I was working. I requested advance notice before family visits. But each attempt at boundary setting was met with resistance, guilt trips, or outright dismissal. When I asked them to respect my work from home days by keeping noise down, Mom acted offended. We tiptoe around here like mice already. Now you want us to be completely silent in our own home. The phrase, our own home, stung more than she knew. This was my home, purchased with my money, maintained with my effort. Yet somehow, in my parents' minds, their temporary stay had transformed into co-ownership without any of the financial responsibility. As the situation deteriorated, I felt increasingly trapped. My home had become a prison of obligation and guilt, and I could see no way out that didn't involve hurting the people who had raised me. Little did I know, the situation was about to become even more complicated with the arrival of some unexpected news. My younger sister Jessica had always been the apple of my parents' eyes. While I was the responsible achiever, Jessica was the creative free spirit who could do no wrong in their view. She had married her college boyfriend Tyler right after graduation and moved to a nearby city where they both worked at a graphic design studio. Our relationship had always been complicated. Growing up, Jessica received praise for her artistic talents and bubbly personality, while I was expected to be the sensible one who made practical choices. When she struggled financially, our parents would send her money they could barely afford. When I needed help with college expenses, I was told to take out more loans because I was the responsible one. Despite this uneven treatment, I tried to maintain a good relationship with my sister. We weren't close, but we were cordial at family gatherings and occasionally met for lunch. So when she called me one Sunday afternoon, excitedly asking if she could stop by with big news, I agreed, though I felt a twinge of apprehension. Jessica and Tyler arrived that evening, both beaming with excitement. My parents hovered around them like attendants to royalty. After barely 5 minutes of small talk, Jessica made her announcement. I am pregnant. You are going to be an aunt, Amanda. The living room erupted in celebration. Mom cried tears of joy, Dad clapped Tyler on the back, and I offered sincere congratulations, pushing aside my complicated feelings to share in my sister's happiness. For the next hour, the conversation revolved entirely around the baby. Due date, potential names, nursery themes. All discussed in animated detail. Then, as Jessica was showing Mom ultrasound pictures, she casually dropped a bombshell. The timing is actually perfect with everything else that is happening. Tyler lost his job last week. The design studio is downsizing. A heavy silence fell over the room. Tyler looked down at his hands, clearly embarrassed. They let go of the 3 newest designers. He explained quietly. I have been sending out resumes, but the market is tight right now. Oh, you poor things, Mom exclaimed. And with a baby on the way, Dad nodded gravely. Family has to stick together in times like these. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach as I recognized the familiar expression on my father's face. It was the same look he had worn when asking if they could stay with me temporarily 3 years ago. Jessica and Tyler can't possibly afford their apartment on just her salary, Mom said, as if thinking aloud. Especially with the baby coming. It is a 1-bedroom anyway, Jessica added. We were already wondering where we would put the nursery. All eyes in the room slowly turned to me. The unspoken expectation hung in the air like a storm cloud. My parents' temporary stay was about to become a multi-generational living arrangement, and I was expected to accommodate everyone. Over the next few weeks, Jessica and Tyler visited more frequently. What had once been casual drop-ins became planning sessions. They would walk through my house, discussing which spaces could be converted for their use. Jessica eyed my home office, measuring the walls with her gaze. This would make a perfect nursery, she declared. Great natural light for the baby. But that is my office, I protested weakly. I work from home 3 days a week. You could set up a desk in the corner of the living room, Mom suggested, as if the solution were obvious. Or the basement. There is plenty of space down there. The basement was unfinished, with concrete floors and exposed pipes. It was currently used for storage and laundry, not a suitable workspace by any measure. But my concerns were brushed aside as trivial compared to the needs of the coming baby. Jessica's entitled attitude grated on my nerves. She opened my closets without asking, discussed painting her room, and even began having baby supplies delivered to my address. A crib appeared in my garage one day. Boxes of baby clothes began accumulating in the guest room. A changing table was assembled in my home office while I was at work. My parents enabled and encouraged this behavior. Mom started clearing out cabinets to make room for baby bottles and formula. Dad talked about converting part of the backyard into a play area. They spoke about these changes as if they were doing me a favor by including me in the planning of the transformation of my own home. You will love having a baby in the house, Mom assured me, misreading my distress as excitement. It will fill this place with joy. The pressure became unbearable. At night, I would lie awake, anxiety crawling through my chest as I imagined my already crowded home bursting at the seams with 2 more adults and a newborn. My sanctuary was vanishing before my eyes, room by room, decision by decision. I finally broke down during lunch with my best friend Rachel. Sitting in a quiet corner of our favorite cafe, I poured out the whole situation through tears of frustration. They are planning to take over my entire house, I sobbed. Jessica and Tyler will move in, the baby will get my office, and I will be squeezed into whatever corner is left. And I am expected to be grateful for the privilege of supporting everyone. Rachel listened with growing alarm, her expression shifting from concern to outrage. Amanda, this is insane, she said finally. You bought that house with your own money. You pay the mortgage. You pay the bills. And they are treating you like an unwelcome guest. But what can I do? I asked desperately. They are my family. Being family doesn't give them the right to take advantage of you, Rachel replied firmly, echoing my therapist's words. You need to stand up for yourself before you lose everything. How? Every time I try to set even the smallest boundary, they make me feel selfish and cruel. Rachel reached across the table and took my hand. You need to decide what you want, Amanda. What would make you happy? If you could wave a magic wand and fix this situation, what would that look like? I closed my eyes and allowed myself to imagine, truly imagine, what I wanted. The answer came with surprising clarity. I want my house back, I whispered. Or rather, I want a place that is truly mine again. Where I make the rules, where my opinion matters, where I can exist without constant criticism. Then that is what you need to work toward, Rachel said. You deserve to be comfortable in your own space. That conversation with Rachel planted a seed in my mind, a possibility I had been too afraid to consider before. What if I could start over somewhere new? Somewhere my family hadn't already claimed as their territory? The idea took root and began to grow. even as events at home continued to spiral out of my control. 2 weeks after my conversation with Rachel, I came home from work to find my parents and Jessica sitting at the dining table, a legal pad covered with notes between them. They fell silent when I walked in, exchanging meaningful glances that immediately put me on edge. "Amanda, sit down," Dad said in his authoritative voice. "We need to have a family discussion." I sank into a chair, my stomach already knotting with dread. Mom reached over and patted my hand in what I assumed she thought was a comforting gesture. "We have been talking about the best arrangement for when the baby comes," she began. "And we think we have figured out the perfect solution. We need to maximize the space," Dad continued, "and make sure everyone has what they need." Jessica nodded enthusiastically. "The baby will need a quiet space, good light, and room for all the equipment." I looked between their expectant faces, already sensing where this conversation was heading, but hoping desperately that I was wrong. "After looking at all the options," Mom said, "it makes the most sense for Jessica and Tyler to take the master bedroom. My bedroom. My private sanctuary. The only room in the house that was still fully mine." I felt the blood drain from my face. "The ensuite bathroom will be perfect for midnight feedings and baby baths," Jessica added, as if this were a selling point I should appreciate. "But that is my bedroom," I said, my voice sounding small even to my own ears. "The baby needs the space more than you do," Dad stated matter-of-factly. "You are just one person. Jessica will have 3 people in that room." "We thought you could move down to the basement," Mom continued. "Dad can help you put up some drywall, make it cozy. Maybe add a small bathroom down there eventually." They continued talking, outlining their grand vision for my home's future, but their voices faded to a distant buzz as I sat in stunned silence. In their plan, I was relegated to the unfinished basement of my own house while they redistributed the remaining spaces among themselves. The absolute audacity of it left me speechless. As they talked, my mind flashed back to 2 weeks earlier, the day after my lunch with Rachel. That morning, I had woken up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Over coffee, I had made a decision that had seemed drastic then, but now felt like the only possible choice. I had called in sick to work, something I never did, and made 2 important phone calls. The first was to a real estate agent Rachel had recommended. The second was to a property management company that handled rentals in a newer building downtown. The real estate agent, Sandra Miller, had come to the house that same afternoon while my parents were out shopping. She had walked through each room, making notes and taking pictures. "The market is hot right now," she had told me. "With your location and the updates you have made, we could list by the end of the week and potentially have offers within days." I had signed the listing agreement on the spot, swearing Sandra to secrecy. My parents didn't need to know until everything was finalized. She had promised to schedule showings while my parents were out and to be discreet with signage. The second meeting had been at the downtown building, our renovated factory now housing modern condos. The 1-bedroom unit was smaller than my house, but it featured high ceilings, exposed brick walls, and a wall of windows overlooking the city park. Most importantly, it had a secure entrance and strict guest policies. As I toured the space, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. This could be my fresh start. "I will take it," I had told the property manager before I could second-guess myself. I put down the deposit that day and signed a 1-year lease starting the following month. The next 2 weeks had been a blur of secret preparations. I began quietly sorting through my belongings, deciding what to take and what to leave behind. I opened a new bank account at a different bank and had my paychecks redirected there. I changed my mailing address for important documents and set up mail forwarding. 5 days after listing the house, Sandra called with news. They had received 3 offers, all above asking price. The best one was from a young couple who had recently relocated for work and needed to move in quickly. They were offering $10,000 above asking price with minimal contingencies and could close in 3 weeks. I had accepted their offer immediately, signing the paperwork in Sandra's office during my lunch break. The weight of the decision had been both terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time in years, I felt in control of my own life again. Now, sitting at the dining table with my family as they planned to relegate me to the basement of my own home, I felt a strange sense of calm. They had pushed me too far, and in doing so, had only confirmed that my drastic decision had been the right one. Amanda? Are you listening? Mom's voice broke through my thoughts. We would need you to move your things this weekend, so we can start preparing the master for the baby. This weekend. The same weekend the new owners would be doing their final walkthrough before closing the following week. The same weekend I planned to move my essential belongings to my new condo. The collision of these timelines would have been comical if it weren't so overwhelming. I need to think about this, I said quietly, rising from the table. This is a lot to process. What is there to think about? Jessica asked, genuinely confused. It is the only arrangement that makes sense for everyone. Everyone except me, I thought bitterly. But I kept that to myself as I retreated to my soon-to-be former bedroom, closed the door, and leaned against it, heart pounding with the knowledge of what was to come. I spent that night researching tenant rights, just to be certain of my legal position. Although my parents had lived in my house for years, they had never signed a lease or paid rent. They were legally classified as guests, not tenants, which simplified matters considerably. Still, I wanted to handle the situation as compassionately as possible while still standing firm. The next evening, I asked everyone to gather in the living room after dinner. Mom had made her special lasagna, perhaps sensing my withdrawal and trying to butter me up with comfort food. Dad had opened a bottle of wine, pouring generous glasses for everyone except Jessica. The mood was light as they assumed I had come around to their plan. I remained standing as they settled onto the couch and armchairs, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had rehearsed this speech countless times, but now that the moment had arrived, my mouth felt dry and my hands trembled slightly. I have given a lot of thought to the living situation, I began carefully. And I have made a decision about the future of this house. Wonderful! Mom exclaimed, clapping her hands together. I knew you would see this was best for everyone. The thing is, I continued, my voice growing steadier, I will not be moving to the basement. In fact, none of us will be living here much longer. Confused expressions spread across their faces. What do you mean? Dad asked, frowning. I took a deep breath. I have sold the house. The new owners will be moving in next weekend. The silence that followed was absolute. For several seconds, no one moved or spoke. Then all three of them started talking at once. This is not funny. Amanda, what are you talking about? You cannot be serious. I reached into my bag and pulled out the sale documents, placing them on the coffee table. I listed the house 2 weeks ago. It's sold in 5 days, above asking price. The closing is next Thursday, and the new owners take possession on Friday. Mom snatched up the papers, her hands shaking as she scanned the legal language. Dad leaned over her shoulder, his face growing increasingly red. Jessica sat frozen, one hand protectively covering her still flat stomach. You cannot do this, Dad finally sputtered. This is our home. No, I said firmly. This is my home. My name is on the mortgage. I have made every payment for the past 4 years. And I have decided to sell it. Without even discussing it with us? Mom's voice rose to a near shriek. How could you be so selfish? Selfish. The word struck a nerve. I have supported all of you for years. I have paid every bill. I have given up my privacy, my space, and my peace of mind. And when I could no longer even keep my own bedroom, I realized it was time for a change. Jessica began to cry. Large theatrical tears rolling down her cheeks. What about the baby? Where will we go? You have your apartment, I pointed out. The same apartment you have been living in all along. We cannot raise a baby there. It is too small. Millions of people raise children in one-bedroom apartments. Besides, with what Tyler is saving on rent, you could look for a larger place. Dad stood up abruptly, his face contorted with anger. You have no right to do this without consulting us. Actually, I have every legal right. This is my property, and I have chosen to sell it. After everything we have done for you, Mom sobbed. This is how you repay us. I felt a familiar wave of guilt, but this time, I refused to let it drown me. I have appreciated having you here, but this was never meant to be permanent. It was supposed to be temporary, until you got back on your feet. So you're just throwing us out on the street? Dad demanded. Your own parents? Of course not. I have arranged for a moving company next Wednesday. I will pay for 3 months in a furnished apartment to give you time to find something permanent. Jessica was already on her phone, frantically texting. Within minutes, my phone began buzzing with messages from extended family. Aunt Sylvia was first, asking if I had lost my mind. Then came Uncle Robert, Cousin Stephanie, and even my grandmother, all expressing shock and disapproval at my decision. Jessica looked up from her phone with red-rimmed eyes. I told everyone what you were doing. No one can believe you would be so heartless. The guilt trips and manipulation tactics were familiar, but this time, they didn't have their usual effect. If anything, they only reinforced that I was making the right decision. I understand you are upset, I said calmly. This is a big change for all of us. But my decision is final. Dad grabbed his car keys. We will see about that. I am going to talk to my friend Bill. He is a lawyer. There must be some way to stop this. There isn't, I replied. I have already confirmed my legal rights. But you are welcome to consult with anyone you like. As Dad stormed out, slamming the front door behind him, Mom dissolved into tears. Jessica moved to comfort her, both of them huddled on the couch like survivors of a shipwreck. I never thought you could be so cruel, Mom whispered between sobs. My own daughter. I am not trying to be cruel, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I am trying to take care of myself for once. By destroying your family? Jessica shot back. By setting boundaries that should have been established years ago. I retreated to my bedroom as the emotional storm continued in the living room. Closing the door, I leaned against it and finally allowed my own tears to fall. This wasn't how I had wanted things to go. In my fantasies, they had understood, or at least accepted my decision with dignity. The reality was messier, more painful, and loaded with the complicated emotions that only family can evoke. That night, I barely slept, listening to the muffled sounds of conversations and phone calls throughout the house. At one point, I heard Jessica on the phone with Tyler, her voice rising as she explained the situation. We will have to live with my parents now. Amanda has ruined everything. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet when I left for work. No one was in the kitchen, no coffee had been made. Just silence and closed doors. The silent treatment had begun, but even that was a relief compared to the emotional confrontation of the previous evening. The days following my announcement were some of the most tense I had ever experienced. My parents and Jessica adopted a strategy of alternating between icy silence and tearful recriminations. One moment they would refuse to acknowledge my presence, the next they would corner me with new arguments about why I should call off the sale. You are making a terrible financial mistake, Dad insisted when he returned from his consultation with his lawyer friend. Real estate is an investment. You should be holding on to this property, not selling it. Think of what this will do to Mom's health, Jessica pleaded. Her blood pressure is already through the roof because of this. Mom took a different approach, reminiscing about my childhood as if to remind me of all I owed them. I gave up my career to raise you girls. I drove you to every piano lesson, every soccer practice. I nursed you through chickenpox and broken hearts. Each attack found its target, piercing the armor of my resolve with precision. But beneath the guilt and doubt, a stronger emotion was taking root. Determination. For too long, I had allowed my own needs to be secondary to everyone else's. This time, I would see my decision through, no matter how difficult the process. The campaign extended beyond my immediate family. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly found time to call, text, or even stop by, all to express their disappointment in my decision. Aunt Sylvia arrived unannounced one evening, armed with a casserole and a lengthy lecture about family loyalty. Family sticks together through thick and thin, she declared, setting the casserole on the counter with a thud. Your parents would never have abandoned you in your time of need. They are not abandoned, I tried to explain. I have arranged and paid for temporary housing while they find something permanent. She waved away my words as if swatting a fly. A hotel is not a home. You are tearing this family apart for what? So you can have your space? That is the most selfish thing I have ever heard. The coordinated guilt offensive might have worked in the past, but therapy had given me tools to recognize these tactics for what they were, attempts to control my behavior through emotional manipulation. Each time I felt myself wavering, I would recall Dr. Marshall's words. Guilt is a powerful tool for manipulation because it works. But just because you feel guilty doesn't mean you have done something wrong. On Tuesday evening, just 2 days before closing, the new homeowners Emily and Mark stopped by to measure for furniture placement. I had warned them that my family was still in residence and might not be welcoming, but they needed the measurements before their moving truck arrived on Friday. When I introduced them to my parents, the reality of the situation finally seemed to sink in. These weren't faceless buyers on a document, they were a real couple with real plans for the house. I saw the fight go out of my father's eyes as Mark asked about the dimensions of the living room. "We have a sectional sofa that we are hoping will fit along this wall," Mark explained, measuring tape in hand. "It should fit," Dad replied mechanically. "This room is pretty spacious." Emily, noticing the tension, tried to be gracious. "You have a lovely home. We can tell it has been well cared for." "Amanda has always been good about maintenance," Mom acknowledged. Her first positive comment about me in days. After Emily and Mark left, promising to see us again on moving day, a new energy filled the house. My parents retreated to their room for a long, hushed conversation. When they emerged, Dad approached me with a changed demeanor. "We need boxes," he said simply, "and packing tape." That night, the first sounds of packing began. Drawers opened and closed, items were sorted, and the occasional disagreement about what to keep or discard drifted through the walls. The process had finally begun. I had already secured a furnished 2-bedroom apartment for my parents through a corporate housing service that specialized in short-term rentals. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, convenient, and paid through for 3 months, giving them ample time to figure out their next steps. Jessica and Tyler would return to their own apartment, a reality Jessica had finally accepted after Tyler put his foot down, refusing to move in with her parents when they had a perfectly good place of their own. "We will make it work," I overheard him telling her on the phone. Plenty of people raise children in apartments. As for me, I had been quietly moving my essential belongings to my new condo during lunch breaks and early mornings. Clothes, important documents, sentimental items that I couldn't bear to lose if things went sideways. The condo was taking shape as my new sanctuary, piece by piece. The professional movers arrived early Wednesday morning, bringing boxes, bubble wrap, and efficiency to the chaotic packing process. My parents, faced with the reality of the timeline, finally began sorting through 3 years' worth of accumulated possessions in earnest. "What about the dining table?" Mom asked as the movers wrapped the chairs. "It stays with the house," I explained. "It was included in the sale. But the apartment is fully furnished, remember?" She nodded, a hint of relief crossing her face at not having to make yet another decision. The process of dismantling a household is exhausting, physically and emotionally, and I could see the toll it was taking on both my parents. By Wednesday evening, most of the house was packed. Labeled boxes lined the walls, furniture was draped in protective coverings, and the rooms echoed with a hollowness that comes from being half-emptied. We ordered pizza for dinner, eating off paper plates at the kitchen counter since the dining table was already wrapped. "Where will you go?" Dad asked suddenly, breaking the awkward silence that had descended over our makeshift dinner. "I have a place downtown," I replied carefully. "A 1-bedroom condo in the converted Westfield factory building." "Downtown?" Mom looked surprised. "You always said you preferred the suburbs." "I think I need a change," I said simply. Thursday morning brought the final walk through with the buyer's inspector and their realtor. As they moved through the house, making notes and checking systems, the reality of what was happening hit me with full force. This house, my first major purchase, the place I had made my own, would belong to someone else by the end of the day. Mixed emotions washed over me as I signed the final paperwork at the title company that afternoon. Relief, sadness, anxiety, and underneath it all, a quiet sense of empowerment. For the first time in years, I had made a decision based solely on what I needed, not what others expected of me. When I returned home that evening, the house felt different. It was no longer mine. Not legally. We were all, in a sense, guests now, staying just one more night before the new owners took possession. Mom had prepared a simple dinner, and to my surprise, set places for all of us at the kitchen island. As we ate in relative silence, I realized this was our last meal together in this house. Despite everything, there was something bittersweet about the moment. I found an apartment listing today, Dad said suddenly. 2-bedroom, ground floor, in that complex near the park. The rent seems reasonable. We are going to look at it next week. I nodded, surprised and relieved that they were making plans. That sounds like a good location. Tyler has been interviewing for jobs, Jessica added. He has a second interview at a marketing firm on Monday. Small steps, but important ones. Perhaps the shock of this change had jolted everyone into action in ways my gentle suggestions never could have. That night, in my empty bedroom with just a mattress on the floor and a few essential items that would go with me in the morning, I felt a strange peace descend. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, I could rest knowing I had finally stood up for myself. The next morning, I woke early and took one last walk through the house before anyone else was up. Each room held memories. Some happy, some painful, all part of my journey. I said a silent goodbye to the space that had been my first real home, acknowledging that homes, like people, sometimes need to be let go so that new beginnings can take root. 6 months after the dramatic move-out day, I sat on the balcony of my downtown condo, sipping coffee and watching the morning light play across the park below. My new home had become everything I had hoped for. A sanctuary, a space that reflected my tastes and priorities, a place where I made the rules. The transition had not been easy for any of us. My parents had initially struggled with the corporate apartment, finding fault with everything from the kitchen appliances to the neighbors. But by the end of the first month, they had secured the apartment near the park that Dad had mentioned. It was smaller than my house, but suited their needs, and most importantly, it was theirs. Our relationship remained strained for the first few months. Phone calls were brief and formal. Holiday gatherings awkward. Mom would occasionally send passive-aggressive texts about how they were managing despite everything, while Dad maintained a stoic distance. Jessica vacillated between cold silence and tearful accusations, depending on her hormonal state. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. Perhaps it was the physical distance that allowed us all to gain perspective. Perhaps it was the natural healing that time provides. Or perhaps it was the boundaries I continued to maintain, gently but firmly, in all our interactions. 3 months after the move, Mom called with news that Dad had found a part-time job as a maintenance supervisor at a local community center. The hours suit him, and he enjoys being useful again, she explained. The pride in her voice was unmistakable. A month later, they invited me to dinner at their new apartment. The space was modest but cozy, decorated with familiar items from their life before moving in with me, things that had been in storage for years. Mom had planted herbs on the small patio, and Dad had built custom shelving for the living room. They had created a home that was truly theirs. We should have done this years ago, Mom admitted as she served dessert. I think we got too comfortable letting you take care of everything. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, and that felt like progress. Jessica delivered a healthy baby boy they named Michael 2 months ago. Despite her dire predictions, she and Tyler had adapted their 1-bedroom apartment by converting a large closet into a nursery nook. Tyler had found a new job with better pay, and Jessica had started doing freelance design work from home while caring for the baby. My relationship with Jessica thawed considerably after Michael's birth. When she called asking if I would come to the hospital, I went without hesitation. Holding my tiny nephew, I felt a rush of love that transcended the conflicts of the past. I understand better now, Jessica said quietly as she watched me with the baby. Having my own family makes me see how important it is to have your own space, your own life. The healing process wasn't linear, and there were still difficult moments. During a family dinner last month, Dad made a comment about my expensive downtown lifestyle that triggered old tensions. Mom still occasionally slipped into criticizing my choices as if she had a say in them. Old patterns don't disappear overnight. But something fundamental had changed in our dynamic. I had proven, to them and to myself, that I could and would stand up for my own needs. That knowledge formed a foundation for a healthier relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. My personal growth extended beyond family boundaries. After years of putting my social life on hold, I began reconnecting with friends and even started dating again. 3 months ago, I met Nathan, a civil engineer with kind eyes and a respect for personal space that I found refreshingly attractive. Our relationship was progressing slowly but steadily, built on open communication and healthy boundaries from the start. My therapist, Dr. Marshall, continued to be an invaluable guide as I navigated these changes. Setting boundaries isn't a one-time event, she reminded me. It is an ongoing practice that requires maintenance and occasional reinforcement. One of the most profound lessons I learned through this experience was the difference between helping and enabling. I had thought I was being kind and generous by supporting my parents indefinitely. But in reality, I was enabling behaviors that weren't healthy for any of us. True help sometimes means saying no, even when that is the harder choice. I also learned that family love doesn't have to mean family sacrifice. It is possible to love your family deeply while still maintaining your individual identity and needs. In fact, the healthiest family relationships have space for both connection and separation, for togetherness and independence. The guilt that had once paralyzed me still appears occasionally, like an old injury that flares up in cold weather. But now I recognize it for what it is, a feeling, not a fact. A feeling that can be acknowledged without being given decision-making power over my life. Last week, I hosted a small dinner party in my condo to celebrate my promotion at work. My parents came, bringing a homemade pie and a housewarming gift they had forgotten to give me earlier. Jessica and Tyler brought baby Michael, who slept peacefully in his portable bassinet while we ate. My friends Rachel and Stephanie completed the group, along with Nathan. As I looked around my table at this blend of family and friends, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. We were finding our way toward a new kind of relationship, one with clearer boundaries and greater respect. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but it was honest and real. The journey from doormat to doorkeeper of my own life had been painful but necessary. I had learned that sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most essential growth. That standing up for yourself isn't selfish but self-respecting, and that true family support goes both ways. As I finish sharing my story with you today, I wonder how many of you have faced similar situations with family or loved ones. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect your own well-being? What boundaries have you had to set in your relationships? Please share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who is struggling with these same issues. And if you found value in my journey, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about navigating complex family dynamics and personal growth. Thank you for listening. And remember that taking care of yourself isn't selfish. It is the foundation that allows you to truly be present for those you love.